Howdy folks, Doc here with Last Best Tool. And when I was doing a kind of a Plier of the Year video, I really was talking up these Milwaukee kind of long reach pliers with this sort of unique overlap design. And there were many comments about these IPS or Igarashi pliers that use a very close, very similar design, but it is different. And they make both the straight jaw, that is the HLS 300 for 300 millimeters long, and then they also have one with a kind of a bent snout on this, and that one is the HLB 300. I don't know, for bent maybe. Maybe HL for hyper long straight, and maybe hyper long bent, just a guess. These also have that slip joint, which is an interesting tangent into kind of a needle nose plier, and obviously something that Snap-on ran with and I think knocked it out of the park when they came out with these. I'm going to do some comparisons here in a sec. But anyway, there are some notable differences. Obviously, if you line them up, this is the difference in height. So the Milwaukee is longer. If you line up the pivots, it has a longer blade, longer snout there, and you can see there is a difference in the choice of grabbing. This has kind of the small wire grabbing like a Knipex often does, and then it goes, there's a little bit of flat, then it goes to a smaller bolt or a hex, and usually, you know, hexes are about what we're grabbing, and then a little bit larger tooth hex. This one here, similar in some ways. It's got a smaller hex at the bottom, a couple of you know, those are a little, they seem a little out of place. I don't know, maybe wire at the low end. Square stock, round stock, bigger, round stock, smaller. Coarse grabbing flat there, and then coarse grabbing fine. This is what the tips look like. So you can see kind of a comparison of the size. I noticed on these that there is definitely, especially right up there, you can see that it hasn't been completely finished before it was chrome plated. And that's another thing, is I think that's like a black oxide, and then this has been ground down. The way you do that is generally one of the last steps in production before, you know, laser etching a name. So it looks like the Milwaukee has a much nicer finish. Milwaukee is a more expensive plier. In fact, it could be, depending where you get it, up to twice as expensive. For some reason, this one sells for less, like only about, you know, 25 bucks on Amazon. This one might be a few bucks more, whereas these seem to be hovering pretty close to 40 unless you buy them in a set. This has basically a bolt and a nut is how this works, so you could probably tighten it if you needed to, maybe. It's hard to tell. It feels pretty solid versus this looks like some kind of hot rivet that the Milwaukee has. But let's get to the performance of these things. One thing, why would you want something like this? Well, obviously you would want a nice slender reach over a longer distance. So being able to go and grab something, you know, is always great with these, but what we're really after is being able to grab something in a confined area. Move that over here. So if I drop something in, and then can I go in and grab it? And the answer there is yes. Well, what about a little tighter tube here? I'll drop something down in there. This doesn't fit. It gets stuck. There's nothing you can do. You open it. In fact, that was one of the things. Open and closed, because of the position of the pivot, really makes no difference in width. Whereas the Milwaukee, that's true at the pivot, but it's very slim. And then to get rid of, you know, this normal expansion here that might run into, actually use this one, run into some trouble here, that's where the crossover, so as soon as I move it, this then slides just fine. So if I put this on over a bolt or a nut or something, I cannot grab it here because this gets stuck. That's one difference. What about the Milwaukee? Milwaukee goes in, promptly hits the bottom. If I try to grab something, it actually gets smaller and Look at that. I can pull this out right through here. In fact, I was playing around and see that? The size? Check this out. So I just dropped that down. It's about the size of the tube. This is pretty amazing here. See that right there? I'm going to drop that in. And with the Milwaukee, if you look at this, the Milwaukee could go through the tube. If I can grab this, and it might take a bit of effort, look at that, and then wiggle it back out through the tube. Look at that. That is amazing right there. So again, I have to give the win to the Milwaukee in that point. Let's talk about this slip joint. What that essentially allows is, you know, basically a parallel grab further away, or a little bit larger. So this is about the parallel grab right there. If you do grab the Milwaukee, something with the Milwaukee, you can see the splay there really doesn't grab well. Where that really comes into play is if you're trying to grab a round object, because it tends to swivel around a lot. If you go to something like this and you open it up, you know, that also is where these indentations help. But if I grab that, well, it has to be something fairly small. Even that's on the, well, that's about right there for the parallel jaws. But if you look at what Snap-on did, going with their large, look at that. It's not quite parallel, but that's one of the wins here. I think it would be really cool if they embedded these jaws, triple joint jaws, onto something like this. They could, you know, you can see the amount of material that is needed for this this joint. You know, that's going to be the problem. But if you went with maybe a little thicker design, not a wider design, might make a difference. Possible, because they aren't high pressure pliers. And speaking of which, check this out. If I throw something in there, say this bolt, and start squeezing, you see the amount of flex right there? I'm going to compare that to the Milwaukee. Go ahead and throw that in and then squeeze. The Milwaukee is a much stiffer plier. So that to me equates to potentially you know, a little bit sturdier steel and potentially maybe higher quality with the less flexing. And I think they probably had to deal with that, you know, going with this kind of a design, because otherwise you'd lose a lot if you flexed. If these flexed in something and then just bowed out, you might lose the ability to hold on to something tight at this end, and then this would kind of bow out, undoing your speltness, your thinness there. So I don't know. Are they good pliers? I think they're great pliers. Really nice. They do fit well in the hand. The handles are smaller, which is kind of interesting, because the rest of it isn't. So you can see right there just how much smaller those handles are. But then this whole big girthy spot in the Milwaukee just disappears when those handles open. And then this thing becomes the big kid on the block. Look at that alignment there. Just how thin these Milwaukees are compared to these IPSs. Close it, it's a different story. Open it. So they're longer, they're stiffer, I think they're finished better, they're more expensive, they're hot riveted versus bolted, and I guess I do like that. These have a slip joint, which is nice. These are chrome finish, might be a nice option if you're in an environment where that makes a difference, you know, more of a corrosive environment. These are, you know, they're a good choice. I have no real problem, except the Milwaukees to me are a little bit better. Now a lot of times if I go to a long reach plier, you know, they just get so wide so fast. This hasn't completely solved the problem of going wide so fast. If you look at it, this part here, just immediately we're starting to get something a little wider. When does it hit that level? Probably about right there. It's about the same width, you know, at this point all the way to here, whereas the Milwaukee, it gets thinner and you can go quite wide. So then if I start widening it up, it's, you know, the jaws are almost like that before this place out here gets to the full thickness up here. But anyway, overall, great players. Just another option. I don't think they're player of the year. Some people have suggested that. First of all, I think they've been out longer than a year. But also, I think the Milwaukee still beats them. However, you know, when you start playing around with a big slip joint like this, maybe there's room for a little bit more. And then, anyway, let me know. And with that, Doc out.